So thank you everyone for joining today's session by the London Policy and Strategy Network, which will be about the London poverty profile. Before I introduce how the session is going to work, and before I introduce Manny from the Trust of London, just wanted to say that as well as this being a London challenge, as well as this being a London policy and strategy network, this is also an event that is part of the London Challenge Poverty Week, which is being hosted by 4 in 10 London's Child Poverty Network. When I stop speaking, I will put a link to the wider events that are taking place as part of the week and the wider resources that you can sign up and find out more about other organisations doing really important stuff to tackle poverty as well. So in this session today, we're going to hear about the London poverty profile from Manny, and then we're going to have a short Q&A, and then we will go out into breakout groups and understand kind of what are the challenges that you see from your local area, or if you're a regional or pan-London or even national organisation, the kind of the key issues that you're seeing in London in terms of poverty, and kind of what areas are there to collaborate, particularly around evidence, and that will be the focus of that. And there will be a Jamboard to kind of record kind of your thoughts and kind of what you're doing, as well as breakout groups, so that you can find out about each other's work, as well as the work by Trust for London too. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Manny, who's the Chief Exec of Trust for London and responsible for the London poverty profile. I'm really grateful to have you here today, and I've used prior London poverty profiles to inform the work that we've done in different councils. So really great to hear from the kind of the London poverty profile and yourself.
Thanks, Noel. Thanks very much for inviting me. And as you said, this is an event that's part of London Challenge Poverty Week. So there's lots of stuff happening. So do click on the link when Noel sends it through. I mean, most of you will know Trust for London, and I'm guessing a lot of you will know about London's poverty profile. We're most well known, I think, in the city for being a funder of projects and organisations that are tackling poverty and inequality. But London's poverty profile is by far the most popular section of our website. So you would probably think most people come to our website to think about how they can apply for money, apply for grants from us or social investment. But actually, no, most people are coming for our data that's on London's poverty profile. So I'm going to talk you through the tool itself today, and I will give you a little bit of a flavour of the sort of narrative and the data around poverty and inequality. But I'm not going to be giving you an overview of the nature of poverty in the city. We can do it another time. It's really about the tool, how it's being used and how it can be used by yourself. So I'm going to share my screen and do most of this via the actual live website itself. I'm just checking. Can someone give me a nod? Can you see the screen at all? You can see my desktop.
Can see your desktop.
Okay, great. And can you see Google Chrome now?
Yeah, can see that now.
Okay, so this is London's poverty profile on our website. You can see the URL here. And I want to talk through the history a little bit of London's poverty profile. So it was created originally in 2009, and you can see the original report here at the bottom of the screen, which is still on our website. And it was intended to be an independent source of data around poverty and inequality in the city that people could use. It was released initially largely every 2 years with some interim reports, and it was a sort of thick a book, I guess, a report which you could use as a sort of reference guide, and not something you could probably read from cover to cover, but something you would dip in and out of over time. We also had a website, and over time it was very clear to us that more people were accessing the data through the website. and that there was a great sort of hunger for data to be updated more frequently than every 2 years, especially as ONS and others got more sophisticated in how they themselves were using data. So about 3 years ago, we decided to revamp the profile itself, and to be frank, invest more money in it, invest in the online offering, and create a system where data could be updated much more frequently, often in a fairly automated way. So when data is released, the indicators would get updated through APIs and code and that sort of stuff, rather than us having to go through everything with spreadsheets and do the calculations by hand. The original London's poverty profile was done with an economics consultancy called a New Policy Institute, Peter Kenway, some of you may have come across in the past. And now we are working with an organisation called WPI Economics, as well as UCL, who are providing some support on the mapping functionality that we've built into the website, but also giving us access to different kinds of data. So London's poverty profile is largely comprised of sort of government official data, survey data, stuff that is very, very robust. And UCL are giving us access to a set of data which comes from consumer sources, which we're viewing as a bit more experimental, but potentially a bit more real time in terms of the feedback it's giving us about what's happening sort of in the city. So London's poverty profile now really is a largely online offering with a summary report that's released sort of every year or so. It's used predominantly by, I guess, people who want to make the case for tackling poverty and inequality in some way or another. So that's we view our users as largely civil society organisations, particularly charities that are applying for grants and want evidence of need in their own communities. They will use our data. It's local government officers, people who are writing briefings, MPs, researchers, those who want quick and easy access to information, as well as sort of journalists as well who are writing news stories, students, and sometimes members of the general public come across our data too. It's not really used by the sort of data scientists and data analysts who like to go back to the original source of data. Essentially, it's made for much more of an audience which doesn't have that high level of data analysis capability. We want to be able to provide it in an easily digestible way for individuals. So if you're, I'm guessing most of your audience here is local authorities, so we often find that in the sort of briefings that are provided in the sort of cases that are forward with councillors, our data may well be being used. So this is the website here, as you can see it. What we do at the moment is we on the homepage we just introduce the report a little bit, and we provide an update of the latest indicators that have been updated. There's a video and various ways into the data. I think this is really what I want to talk about here is ways into the data and how you can use it. So most people like to come into our data through sort of topics. What is the topic you want to sort of look at? And we have divided London's poverty profile into 5 buckets. As with any categorization, there is a bit of overlap. There's a bit of searching around if you can't always find. Sometimes you don't know whether something around housing and poverty might be in housing or in living standards, and I'll explain a little bit about that now. But what I want to do is take you through these 5 categories and show you some of the data and how you can use it. So if you go into housing, which I've already got a tab open here, you're taken to a page which essentially has a long list of indicators here on the left around poverty and housing in London. It covers things such as homelessness, private sector, social housing and temporary accommodation, and so forth. We are aware that it's a big long list, and we're looking at creating subcategories to make it a little bit easier to navigate. But essentially, once you come to the site, you can look through and hopefully find the indicator that you want, or find an indicator that is close enough to the data that you want to support you. So I'm going to click on one of these here. One I think which is for me one of the most powerful bits of data on the site, and this is essentially the relative costs of housing in London. So when you click on an indicator, you can see a graph that comes up here on the right, and a bit of blurb, but you can also go deeper. And I'm going to just go deeper here, and it takes you to the specific page. And I'll talk about the data itself, then I'll talk about some of the things around the page here. And why I think this is incredibly powerful, because it just shows the impact of housing on poverty in London. So you can see here that households in poverty spend 54% of their income on housing costs, and the figure for the rest of England is 36%. So it's significantly more money spent by low-income households on housing in London, and it's a key driver for the high levels of poverty in London. So you can see here the graph and the text is designed to be fairly easy to understand. So something that you could potentially copy and paste into a briefing or use to. Can the screen be zoomed into? Let me try that now. Sorry, 1 second. I'll zoom in again. Hopefully that's a little bit clearer now to read. We also have an accessibility widget here on this side, which you can use to create bigger text and for other accessibility requirements if they're needed. But I appreciate it's difficult looking on a small screen. But so what you can do with this data is you can download the charts. So it's very easy to download in a variety of formats. Again, enabling you to pop it into whatever document or a presentation you want to create. You can share. Not many people share sort of share it, use the share function, but it is there if you want to share on Twitter or Facebook. And also, really importantly, you can understand where the data comes from. So if you click on data source, it gives you information about the provenance of that data. And we hope to be able to include things in the future, like when it's next going to be updated, for example. So that's a sort of overview of how the sort of data is used. And so we really feel like what people use here is they download charts, they take the numbers and the text, and they want to put that into whatever format they're using. So we have a section on housing. The second category is around living standards, and this is where most of our indicators around sort of the overall poverty are housed. And as we know right now, as we face a sort of a bit of a cost of living crisis, living standards are hugely important, and that's why we've got a number of indicators here on the left. And I wanted to focus on this one, which is a map. And again, I'll just click in so you can see it hopefully in more detail. And it's not appearing right now. Here it is. So this map was created by through our partnership with UCL's Consumer Data Research Center. They built some maps for us here, and this is the latest index of multiple deprivation, but it's showing deprivation not relative to England but relative to London. So yeah, in a sense, it's called, we rebased it in that way, and it allows a really good overview of where within London the most deprived areas of London are. And again, you can turn off various buttons here. It's going a little bit slowly because I'm sharing my screen, that allow you to sort of customize the map, and you can zoom in, you can do a postcode search, and again, it has similar sort of functionality. You can download the graph, and it will download whatever you're seeing in front of you. So if you've turned some deciles off, you'll sort of download that too. So again, that's the sort of living standards category. The third category we've got is around people, and for a very long time, it kind of frustrated our comms team. The most successful, the most visited page on London's poverty profile was just the London population data. It was highest up in Google, where what's London's population? It wasn't about poverty at all. We've now sort of worked on that quite significantly. I think that it might be actually that borough data comes up quite near the top of the Google search for us anyway. But anyway, I wanted to focus here on, this is essentially demographic information, and here we've got a chart which is looking at healthy life expectancy and life expectancy across London. So again, wherever we can, we provide borough level data. We can provide ward level data. We try to provide ward level data, particularly through mapping, I think is the easiest way to do that. We are severely restricted by data sources. And I guess what I like to show about this graph is, again, you can click off and on some of these dots to make it simpler or more complex, depending on your needs. So here I particularly like the measure of healthy life expectancy, which is the number of years you can expect to live in good health rather than sort of disability and poor health. And again, here you can see some of the disparities that exist across London, and also the differences between men and women. The fourth category is a bit of a every category needs a bit of a bucket, the thing you put some of the odd sort of fitting in titles in, and this is a little bit of a bucket. It's called shared opportunities, and it's essentially to think about how think about it as how sort of issues and things that are around the place you live and your neighborhood might affect your ability to take up sort of opportunities. And here we've got a really great data set on road traffic collisions in London and their link to deprivation. And you can see here in the sort of lowest, the least deprived areas, there is significantly less in terms of overall numbers of collisions. And actually, if you click in to this indicator, there are more graphs which delve deeper into this particular issue. So one of the things we thought was is this the case, for example, because of some of the big roads going through some of the more deprived areas? That could be a sort of artifact of this data. So here you've got a graph looking at just the local streets and not necessarily the big roads going through. So you can see similar levels of effect here. And a lot of our sites will have multiple graphs. A lot of the sections of the site will have multiple graphs looking at different aspects. And the final category, topic category, is around work and worklessness, obviously a huge part of the nature of poverty. And there's a lot of data here around welfare and pay and so forth. And this is perhaps one of the most striking graphs which shows the impact of the pandemic on universal credit claimants. And actually, lots of our data is time series data, and what you will find is there will be big jumps up and down in and around the financial crash of 2008. We are still only just getting some of the data through around the sort of pandemic years, and you will see big leaps, and this will probably start to go. I think it is going down now around universal credit claimants. May rise up again now that furlough has sort of ended. So you'll see these sort of big leaps and when there's big shocks in society, but generally it's a trend. It's going in a direction, up or down or staying kind of flat. Very rarely are there those sort of big leaps in particular ways. So those are the categories. But I mean, again, I imagine many of you are from London boroughs, or you work in a borough, and it's that borough level data that you're really interested in. And that is where I think we have tried to provide some layers of sophistication, and we want to do a lot more. It's unfortunate that a lot of the sort of local and borough level data, we have to have access to a special sort of ONS license, which has been hard to come by given the pandemic. But it probably won't surprise any of you in a borough that the most popular part of our borough data is the comparisons. Which borough is doing well and which borough is doing worse. Those sorts of comparisons always seem to draw in particularly local authority sort of officers. We used to rank boroughs from 1 to 32 based on their sort of general performance around these indicators, but it wasn't massively sophisticated because the difference between number 1 and 2 might have been 0.01%, but 1 is still number 1 and 1 is number 2. It wasn't a statistical way of doing things. So what we've done here is produce this tile which shows how boroughs are doing in relation to the average, so the standard deviation essentially. So here you've got, when it's red, it's worse, it's significantly worse than the average. When it's dark blue, it's significantly better, and when it's sort of light blue, it's roughly sort of on par with the average. And when it's white, there's no data, and they are sort of essentially ranked here from the ones with the most reds at the top with the ones with the least reds at the bottom. But it's a more statistically robust way of showing really how different boroughs compare to one another. And this is a really popular section of our website. It's just been updated. I won't zoom out to show you the whole thing in its entirety. You can sort of see it on our website. And I won't pick on any borough either, because most of these things are influenced by factors that are probably out of the local authorities' control. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. So really popular site. And actually, you can go into different boroughs as well. I go into my home borough of Redbridge, and you can see here you can get a bit of a dashboard. Again, we want to work on this a little bit more, but going back to the original, the data I've shown you in the different topic areas, but it again shows you in an overview format about the borough's data in that particular sense. And again, the color coding here is about the average. So here, Redbridge, I'm trying to find it. Green means it's better than average. Yellow, that yellow I think means sort of on average, and then if there's a red anywhere, that's worse than average. So again, trying to give you some comparisons, because we know that local authorities really value that, and we want to do more on that comparison in future, but comparing more boroughs to their sort of statistically similar boroughs, rather than necessarily just the ones around you or anything. We want to try and make it meaningful in whatever way we can. And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about population. So we have carved up the data here as well by population, so you can enter in this way. And that's because a lot of people really are interested in a breakdown of data around different demographic characteristics. We often, for example, get asked for what data we have around sort of different ethnicities in London and the impact of various things on that. Again, we're really constrained by the data sources here, so wherever we can provide a breakdown, we will. But as you can see here, there's not a huge amount of indicators where we can really go into depth here. And we are hoping that, at least with the census data coming out next year, we might well be able to do bigger deep dives into issues around things like ethnicity and disability going forward. So that's an overview of the tool, really. I kind of wanted to stop there and sort of take questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see others. Yeah.
Great, many thanks for that, Manny, and that was a really great whistle-stop tour, and such a comprehensive profile as well in terms of the different factors that affect poverty. And amazing how your team have brought together kind of different data that would take each of us kind of a lot of time both to think about what data we should be gathering, let alone where we might be able to get it, and to be able to visualize it and download it. As well as the comparison between boroughs, which I think is always important when we're talking about poverty, and not least an evolving situation with the pandemic, and that focus on breakdown on kind of specific kind of demographics as well, which increasingly, as we look at the disproportionate effects of poverty as well as the pandemic on particular communities. So really thanks for that presentation. And people do put questions in the chat. A question I've got, Manny, is how is Trust for London using kind of the insights itself for your own kind of direction for travel, in terms of how you prioritize your funding and kind of other work that you do?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. We operate on a sort of 5-year strategy cycle. So at the beginning, we're about to enter a new one where we will look at all of the data around not just London's poverty profile, but data that comes through a lot of the research reports we write, data that is coming through in more informal ways through our grantees, and can sort of compile all of that into an analysis, which we then put to our trustees and then decide really where to focus our funding. I think that the interesting thing about using LPP data from a decision-making point is other than the pandemic and the financial crash, as I said, things are on a trajectory. So the data rarely, when it comes in, it doesn't necessarily, you don't suddenly get that wow, light bulb moment, because it's kind of moving in the direction it sort of was before. And for the last 20 years, that direction has largely been around things like the rise of in-work poverty, the rise of poverty in the private rented sector, and the sort of levelling out of poverty between inner and outer London, with outer London sort of rising in poverty levels. Those have been the large trends that we, which the pandemic may change some of those, we'll see. But so I think people use this mainly because they know what case they want to make, and they're looking for the data to back it up. I think that's the causality of the data and change, really.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a reflection in the chat by Lisa around where you've got pockets of poverty in boroughs that kind of overall seem to be kind of doing well from a kind of statistical basis, but maybe in particular neighbourhoods there's some really strong pockets of poverty. And I guess this isn't necessarily a reflection on the poverty profile, but perhaps more so on the kind of the how the data is collected by those organisations that do. And I was just wondering whether you had any reflections about kind of what organisations maybe need to do to kind of to better reflect those kinds of nuances.
Yeah, and that's essentially that's where IMD data I think comes in really handy, index of multiple deprivation, because it does go down to I think lower super output areas. So you can zoom into those maps and look at more borough level data. But yeah, a lot of the stuff on there is at the borough level, and those inequalities are very much sort of hidden. And a lot of this depends on what scale you're looking at things as well. So if you're looking at things from a pan-London scale, the neighbourhoods, the story around inequality around different neighbourhoods is fairly well known. But you're maybe looking at boroughs. If you're within a borough, you're very much more interested in wards and neighbourhoods, and I think so. It sort of it works against you in that particular sense. So we totally recognise it. Wherever we can get more granularity, we will give it. It's just data source limitations. But IMD, I think, is still really good for the borough and neighbourhood stuff.
And on the levelling up agenda, which kind of means different things to different people. I guess for any new policy agenda, actually kind of measuring its impact or kind of measuring like what it actually means is really important. Do you and obviously within the levelling up agenda, there's a desire to kind of rebalance regional kind of inequality and I guess to some extent away from London. Do you kind of what are your thoughts about how the London poverty profile can be used to better show those complexities when we talk about inequality, particularly from a regional perspective, but also kind of within regions? Actually, there isn't kind of a one size fits all view of a region. There's quite a variety of complexities within that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and I think partly the answer depends on who you're talking to. So let's say we're talking to a national audience around about trying to make the argument you're making. I noticed Sharon has put in the comments around life expectancy in Kensington being compared to other areas as well. And those sorts of arguments at a national level. The thing we have to remember is that outside of our world, people don't understand that London has the highest poverty rate in London, in the country. Sorry, they don't understand the impact of high housing costs on so many Londoners. London is often portrayed as gilded and lacking in same inequalities that the North may facing compared to the South. So we have to, in a sense, repeat ourselves over and over again using the data that's there. And so it's not about making a more sophisticated case using more granular data. It's about making the high level case over and over and over and over again, because it just doesn't cut through unless you repeat endlessly. And that's really a difficult thing for organizations, because it gets quite boring to continue saying it. We have to remind ourselves not many people know. We have to still focus on the very high level things, the cost of housing, the high levels of children in poverty in London, and the overall poverty rates. It's sticking to those key big numbers, really.
And there's another question about you mentioned the consumer data from UCL. What kind of data is that you've fed into the profile?
Yeah, so they have various different data sets which they get from different companies. They also use ONS data. It could be financial organisations or retail companies, club card, that kind of data to provide I guess, as I said, more real time type stuff. We've done some things on, for example, the availability of broadband and how that varies across London. The assumption is there are no black spots around broadband, but there are, and whether there's a link to deprivation. We've also done. They also have created some composites, some indexes. So they've got what's called an e-food desert index, and it's still very experimental, because it can throw up perverse results, and this was definitely one of them for our agenda. In that the e-food desert is looking at availability of the ability to order food online and get it delivered, like Tesco's groceries or whatever. And actually, the neighbourhood it threw up as the worst was one of the wealthiest in the borough. So it didn't quite have that correlation. But that's why we view it as experimental. We really want to see what it can do. Actually, some of the most interesting data on there is looking at, they have a great register through various different means. They have a register. They can pretty much track individuals. Obviously, they do it in an anonymized, safe way. We don't get access to that. they can track individuals and how they move around using electoral roll register data and some clever analytics. So they can kind of show where people are moving in and out of London neighbourhoods. So we've got some great data. I don't know if it's been published yet or it's coming soon, which is looking at basically when people, stories we already know, when people are moving into London, they're trading down in deprivation deciles. So they're moving into essentially a more deprived neighbourhood than they would before. And when they're moving out of those, they tend to be moving into sort of up the ladder, really. So confirming stuff we already know, and showing that they generally, people don't move very far out of London. They're moving within borough or to neighbourhood boroughs. So we're just trying to see whether that provides insight, and I think we're still working it out. Yeah.
And then kind of one more question before we kind of go into the breakout rooms. Someone's talking about kind of the gap with people on no recourse to public funds around those populations. I know you were talking about kind of broad demographics that you cover in the poverty profile. Is there anything, kind of within the poverty profile around that, or is that kind of a gap that those organisations collecting the data kind of need to look at, given the prevalence of NRPF across a number of different demographics, actually, which sit in often different service areas, don't they? So sometimes they might be lost within other kind of data collection.
Yeah, I mean, I can't provide much insight into no recourse public funds. It's just not in the data set. So it's not measuring, and that population isn't much. I haven't had much experience of that. But there are lots of areas like that, like Egyptian traveller communities in London, for example, where actually maybe one of the best approaches outside of if it doesn't crop up in the census is to support those communities themselves to collect data. Obviously, it has the downsides of only being a snapshot, a one-off, not regularly collected, but at least it might provide some data. And I think that's one way which sometimes these problems are overcome.
No, that's really great. And so before we go into breakout rooms, I've put a Jamboard, which should be kind of a relatively easy way for everyone on this call to input kind of information, and kind of what we're really keen to kind of to understand is people working in kind of their local areas, like what work you're doing to better understand and kind of research poverty in your local area. So I think that's always a really good way to for people to learn from each other. So that might be qualitative research or quantitative data collection. It might be using peer research or from local communities or from others as well as other research that might be kind of more pan-London. And on the second page of the Jamboard really speaks to what we just talked about, is kind of what work is needed to improve the understanding of poverty in your area or London, and that might be around kind of specific groups like no recourse to public funds. It might be on other ways of kind of understanding poverty in particular local areas or for particular issues as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a few minutes where people can do some silent post-itting on the Jamboard, and then we'll go into breakout groups and then extend that discussion around what organisations are doing in their local areas to better understand and poverty, and kind of what gaps there are that you'd like to work on, because there might be opportunities for for collaboration and potentially also opportunities to put to pan-London organisations that are, or even national organisations that are collecting data around poverty. Hopefully everyone can access the Jamboard, and we'll have until about 22, and then you can continue on the Jamboard and have conversations in the breakouts, and then we'll come back at around 5:02 to have some concluding remarks, and then share future events as well. Oh, and as you're adding in your post-its, I should have said, do mention the organisation so that we can see who is doing the work that you're doing. Right, I'm just going to set up the breakout group. So do continue adding to the post-its. We'll also have a discussion about what you're each doing to better understand poverty in your local area, and kind of gaps also that you think are needed either in your kind of local area to better understand poverty, or at kind of at a pan London level as well. So you should be ferried out to your breakout groups in just a short moment. And do note that we won't be recording the breakout groups. We're just recording the main session.